So it's good to be here in beautiful Nimbin. This is my second trip here. I was here originally in the mid-late 90s a couple of times, in the very early days of Nimbin. It's wonderful to see both how things have remained very similar and how they have changed since that time. But I'm in Vancouver, Canada, and we do a lot of activism work there to change the laws. We've made a lot of progress over the last 20 years as well. I want to tell you a little bit about what's been happening in Canada and some of the history there, and hopefully we can learn something from each other about how we're going to change these laws in our countries and get rid of cannabis prohibition all around the world. So I've been working as an activist for over 20 years in Canada, and we've made most of our success there not through changing the laws, but through ignoring them and fighting them with civil disobedience. That to me, and it depends on what the local situation is, how effective that is, but to me, civil disobedience is the key to ending prohibition and to getting these laws off the books. The first step is to get the police to ignore the enforcement, and then the next step is to actually change the laws. And so in Canada, if you walk around the city of Vancouver, it feels like pot is legal right now. We've got over 150 stores that sell medical marijuana. Many of them, their definition of medical is very broad and very accessible. There's places you can go and smoke and use cannabis very openly and freely. On April 20th, we had about 100,000 people gather in Vancouver's biggest outdoor park and had a wonderful celebration of the cannabis culture with over 200 booths selling high-potency marijuana products, extracts, edibles, all kinds of things. It is actually, I would say, unique in Vancouver, this cannabis farmers market that we have every year at 420, where vendors set up booths, they sell cannabis very openly and freely, and nothing bad happens at all. And like a lot of the things that we've accomplished, and I think what you've accomplished here too, it doesn't happen all at once. It takes many steps and many small steps to get to that place. So, for our 420 rallies, for instance, we started those in the mid-90s, around the same time things were getting started here in Nimbin. Our first 420 rally in Vancouver had about 24 people getting together in a little park in the middle of the city to listen to some music and smoke a few joints and enjoy themselves. And every year that event got a little bigger and a little bigger and a little bigger, and we changed locations and we got bigger and bigger and bigger. And we started pushing things more and more. We have a great activist in Vancouver, a guy named David Malmo Levine. You should bring him here one time. He'd be an inspirational guy to have come talk. And he encouraged people to resist the police peacefully and openly using a technique called hug power. What that would mean is if you see somebody being arrested for a nonviolent minor marijuana offense, you go over and you hug that person, and you get a lot of your friends to go and hug that person too. And it makes it very challenging for the police to drag everybody off of that person and to arrest them for possession or trafficking in a small quantity. Does not mean they won't do it. Depending on what country you're in and how the police behave, this kind of behavior can get you in a lot of trouble, or it can make the police stand down, depending on how things are, depending what kind of media presence you have, and depending how easily the police are shamed for their kind of bad behavior. And so he would give a talk at the beginning of every event about hug power. And even if nobody would get arrested, the police hear this talk and they're like, oh my God, if we arrest somebody, they're all going to start hugging each other and we're going to have to pull them off each other. And it makes them reconsider sometimes getting involved, taking that kind of action. I remember one year specifically, in the late 1990s, we had a marijuana rally and the cops picked off one of the kids at the edge of the crowd and tossed him in the paddy wagon. So David Malmo Levine got a bunch of his friends, and they all sat around that paddy wagon in a big circle with their arms locked, and they refused to move. Now, in some parts of the world, the cops will just beat everybody up, and you'll all get arrested and put away for a long time. So these tactics don't always work everywhere. But in Vancouver, with a bunch of reporters there, and with the things the way they were, the cops decided to sit there. They sat there for an hour or two. Eventually, they called this kid's mom, and they released him into the custody of his mother, because they didn't want to give him back to the mob, and they weren't going to get him down to the police station for trafficking in a gram. So they let him go into the custody of his mother. And that was pretty much the last time the cops tried to arrest anybody for trafficking at a marijuana rally in Vancouver. We stood them down and we won. And people started showing up with bags of joints and bags of cookies. Then one year, one guy set up a table. And David would always get everybody, come to the middle of the crowd. There'd be a lot of people there. Come to the middle of the crowd. If you want to buy or sell marijuana, come to the safe space in the middle where we can protect you with our bodies and with the people. And people began more confident selling and buying marijuana at these events. And it spread and spread. And one table became 2 tables, became 5 tables. And now it's 200 booths, all nicely organized in rows. Many of them pay a fee to have their spot booked. And They sell all kinds of cannabis products. And at our request, they put up signs saying, 19 or older, we won't sell to you. Many of them check ID and make sure they're not selling to minors. And it's really quite a wonderful thing we've got there in this city in terms of public civil disobedience. That's how we got our dispensaries going too. I opened Vancouver's 3rd dispensary in 2008. Before that, there was 2 other places in the city where you could buy medical marijuana. And they'd been open a long time, much longer than I had. But they were very discreet in how they operated, very quiet. They made sure not to get a lot of attention and just to try to serve the patients that they could, and that's understandable. But I thought, well, these guys have been open a long time. The cops know they're there. If I open one and do it a little more openly, they're not going to come after me, I hope. And so I did that in 2008. We opened Vancouver's 3rd dispensary, one of the first dozen in the country. And then I spent a great deal of time teaching others how to open their own dispensaries. And I still do that. I go on tours. I talk to people. I take phone calls every day. While I've been here, I've had people calling me, asking me how they can get open in Canada. The first 5 or 6 that opened in Vancouver after me all had me on their board of directors, and I helped out one way or the other. But now we've got about 150 shops in Vancouver that sell medical marijuana, and they're proliferating all across the country. In Toronto, Canada's biggest city, they're opening very rapidly. I expect there to be 200 or 300 there by the end of the year. We're seeing them opening in small cities and places all around the country. And sometimes they get raided and busted. That happens fairly often. Somebody gets busted for opening a dispensary. But luckily in Canada, we have a Charter of Rights and a court system that is unwilling to put anybody in jail for any length of time for providing medical marijuana. So when I talk to people, I say, look, if you want to open a dispensary, be aware of the worst case scenario. And maybe here it's a different one, but think of that worst case scenario. If you can handle that, then go for it and do it. The worst case scenario in Canada is usually you're going to lose your money. You might get a criminal record, which makes it impossible to travel to the US. They won't let you in the country. You might go to jail for the weekend, maybe. That's about it. You're unlikely to get real time. So if you can take that risk, then do it. Open a dispensary and make it happen. And I would urge you to take the same consideration here and think about what the worst case scenario is for whatever your activism is going to be. And if you can live with that, then go forward and make it happen. And often the worst case scenario won't be what happens to you, but that's how you make that decision if you're going to take that risk or not. So I spent a lot of time traveling around Canada telling people how they can get involved, how they can be part of the marijuana revolution. And of course, being here in Nimbin, it's the heart of the marijuana revolution in Australia. And some very brave people have sacrificed and worked for a very long time to make this place as wonderful and special and as safe as it is. Although I still see the cops harassing the hell out of people, blocking off entryways, raiding stores, wandering around town like they own it. And that to me is not acceptable and needs to be resisted. The police cannot be allowed to create these rules. They have to be told that the people are the ones who make the rules, and the police have to abide by that. And I find often when you stand up to the police, they will back down. The police, they got weapons, they got guns and tasers and pepper spray and the full force of the state behind them, but they will back down when you stand up against them. If you do it properly, openly, ideally with the media there to give you some coverage and some witness, they will often back down. And if they don't, then you take your lumps, but you come back again and again. And in Vancouver, when we started in the 90s, they would raid bong shops, right? They would come after bong shops. Marc Emery especially, you might have heard of the guy. He's pretty well known. He got things going by opening and selling bongs and pipes in Vancouver. And these laws are still on the books. People still get busted in small towns in Canada for selling bongs and pipes. But because we resisted, because we went to court, and the court was like, you're selling bongs? Okay, $5,000 fine, you can go back to work. So the cops and the courts would spend $250,000 raiding and busting and going to trial, and they get a $5,000 fine in the end. They go, well, that wasn't really worth it. And so they stopped. And so now bongs and pipes and seeds are sold widely across Canada. So I'm a strong believer in civil disobedience. I'm a strong believer in doing your best and standing up to the police. But like I said, it depends on your local situation. It depends how you want to do that. And I think the best is to find those weak spots, those cracks in the system, where you can break the law openly, but where people are going to go, yeah, well, that's kind of a dumb law anyways, isn't it? I knew a guy who was in a small town in Canada, Grand Forks, and he wanted to grow industrial hemp. And he applied for his hemp license, and they would not give it to him. So he got upset about that. I want to grow hemp, but they won't give me one. So he got some hemp seeds, and he planted a bunch of hemp on his property in the shape of the word H-E-M-P, big letters, growing hemp plants very openly on his property, very visible from the road. The police came and arrested him. Then while he was facing charges, he ran for mayor of that town, Grand Forks, and he won. He became mayor of Grand Forks while facing these charges. And sure enough, shortly thereafter, they dropped the charges, and soon after that, he got his hemp license for the next year. And he was mayor many years, and he's now mayor again. He's still mayor of Grand Forks many decades later. And so, the people power can make a difference when you stand up, when you do these kind of things. And obviously, he was growing marijuana. It's low THC, hemp marijuana, but under Canadian law, it's still marijuana. But a judge and a jury don't want to put this guy in jail for growing hemp on his lawn in the shape of the word hemp. That just seems silly, right? So you find the ways where you can break the law and you can make the law look stupid. And medical marijuana, I think, is a wonderful political tool. And I say that if marijuana just made us feel good and got us high and had no other benefit, that would be good enough for me. Like that would be fine with me. But the fact that this plant also has incredible medical benefit and can heal us in so many different ways. The fact that this plant also has seeds that are one of the world's greatest nutritional sources and that can feed us and give us health and medicinal value that way. That this plant's fibers can clothe us and keep us warm and provide us with textiles for our industry. That its roots even have incredible medical use, can be made into balms and salves. And all of this in one plant is so wonderful and so incredible that I am so proud to stand up for this plant and stand up for our culture. And for me, I say that smoking marijuana is one of the best decisions I ever made. The decision to begin using cannabis and to join the cannabis culture. And I bet you feel the same way too. That cannabis has been a blessing in your life and has helped you have better health and has helped you and your loved ones have better lives and more fulfilling existence and to maybe actualize yourself more and become in tune with yourself more and who you really are and what you really want. And so I love cannabis so much that I want to give back to this plant because it's helped me in my life in so many ways, and I see it helping others in so many ways, and I want everybody on earth to be able to enjoy cannabis and to use it and love it and be part of this culture in the way that I am and so many others are. And I've seen this culture grow so wonderfully over the last few decades. When I started doing this in the early 90s, and I know many of you here have been doing this longer than I have perhaps, and it was a difficult time back then because the culture was not really open, the laws around the world were more severe, and people weren't aware in the same way of all the wonderful benefits we have now. We have come so far in these last 20 years in Canada, in Australia, and all around the world in terms of awareness, in terms of people converting to our side and becoming parts of the cannabis culture. I've met so many police officers, including one I was just talking to a few minutes ago at the Hemp Embassy. People who spent much of their lives harassing, raiding, beating up pot smokers, destroying plants, tearing down grow rooms. And then they realized one day, this is a bunch of bullshit, and what I'm devoting my life to is the exact opposite of what I should be doing. And they get into policing feeling that they're ignorant, and they think that all drugs are the same, and that cannabis is a terrible substance, and they think they're doing the right thing, and they're busting all these junkies and getting these drugs off the street. Then they have a moment of realization, or they read something, or they talk to somebody, or they realize this is wrong. What I'm doing is totally wrong. This is not why I became a police officer, to harass innocent people, what plants they grow in their garden, or what medicine they use. And they have this moment of realization, and they change. And often it's something personal that happens to them. They have to use medical marijuana, or somebody they love has to use medical marijuana, and suddenly it's not just an abstract thing, it's somebody they know. And we have converted so many people. You don't see many folks coming from I used to think it should be legal, but now I realize how bad cannabis is and what a mistake that was. That doesn't happen very often. But we get converts to our side every single day. People are joining the cannabis cause, whether or not they use marijuana, and many of them are, and more people should be using marijuana as a medicine all around the world. But they are joining our cause. And we are getting so close to legalization. But the last days of prohibition, and it's not going to fade away. It's going to be worse than ever the day before they legalize it. Busts are going up around the world in many ways. In Canada, we have a prime minister who smoked pot while he was an MP. His mom says she still smoked pot. His dad, who's a former prime minister, used to smoke pot when he was younger. His deceased brother was facing marijuana charges when he died. Our prime minister's deceased brother was facing pot charges when he died several years. His whole family smokes pot. And he's the prime minister of our country, yet marijuana arrests are happening faster than ever in Canada. Our prime minister has promised to legalize in a year or two, but the police are saying, we don't care. We're going to enforce these laws to the letter until the day comes that the law changes. And we're hoping we have a lot of work then, too, they say. We're hoping that there's a lot of work for us in enforcing these new marijuana laws and the new legalization. They do not want to let go of what is a very valuable tool for them, which is marijuana prohibition. But we are seeing change, we are seeing converts, and we are going to win this war. In Canada, in Australia, and around the world, we are going to win this war. And I tell you, it's going to happen because of folks like this in this room, because of me and my friends in Canada, because of activists in the US and in Russia and in Asia. You know, in Thailand, they're celebrating their first 420 this year. Brave activists in Thailand got together to have a rally to celebrate their love for the cannabis plant in Thailand, where that kind of stuff gets you some pretty severe jail sentences. If people are willing to stand up. This is a global revolution. And what we are doing in rooms like this in Australia and all around the world is having an impact. And when these laws change country by country, it will affect the whole planet. And I hope that 10 years from now, we look at the countries that still have not legalized yet as backwards repressive countries. And we think of ourselves as so much more enlightened because we legalized marijuana and we've changed those laws. And wasn't that a wonderful thing? And I tell you, 20 years from now, people will look back and go, what was all the fuss about? Why were they busting people for pot? Because it's legal now and nobody cares and everything's fine. In fact, things are way better than they were. And we're going to look back upon this 100 years of prohibition as a terrible mistake, as a time of ignorance and a time that caused so much harm and so many problems, things that we can't even see now. Because, you know, no matter how old you are, we were all born into this system. You know, we were all born into cannabis prohibition. So in some ways it seems normal. And it seems like as legalization is some kind of strange thing or that it's abnormal to have cannabis be legal. But in fact, it's the most normal thing of all. And when we look back upon this time, it will seem like a very dark time to our kids and grandkids, a very, very dark time indeed. And I hope that I'm alive to see that happen. But I tell you, even when legalization happens, even when the law changes, we still have a lot of work to do. Because the shame and discrimination of the cannabis culture is not only in the laws. That's where it lies, a lot of it. We're still going to be losing our kids. We're still going to be getting fired from our jobs. We're still going to be facing discrimination every way, not just because of the law, because of a culture that is focused on alcohol and promotes alcohol and hates marijuana for some reason. And I see this over and over again, the alcoholics and the alcohol drinkers. And I'm not saying we should ban alcohol, and I enjoy some beer and wine once in a while myself. But I see over and over again the alcohol enthusiasts, the politicians who promote alcohol when they're running their election campaigns, the police who are far more than regular people, alcoholics and drunkards. And they want to focus their hate and their energy on the peaceful, kind, considerate, safe marijuana users. And whatever you say about marijuana, no one can ever argue that cannabis is nearly as harmful as alcohol is. You know, we know that cannabis is beneficial and wonderful and a medicine that helps heal your body and your soul. But even those who hate marijuana and who make up things about how harmful it is, they can never justify the idea that cannabis is anything but incredibly safe when compared to alcohol, their favorite substance. And so I hope that we see a time when alcohol and cannabis are at least treated equally. You know, in Vancouver, like I said, we got 150 medical marijuana dispensaries, and the city's like, okay, we're going to start licensing these places and giving them business licenses to regulate them because we can't stop them. And we say, great, we want regulations. Give us some bylaws. Treat us like other businesses. And they go, okay, we're going to make it so you have to pay 80 times the business license fee of a liquor store. We want 30 grand a year for your business license. And you got to be twice as far from schools as liquor stores are. So in Vancouver, liquor stores have got to be 150 meters away from schools, although they allow plenty of exemptions for that. We have to be 300 meters away from schools or we're going to get shut down. So the rules they're putting in Vancouver are going to mean that 90% of these dispensaries are going to be shut down, which of course we're not going to stand for. I find it very bizarre that I've been in business with my dispensary for 10 years now with no license, no regulation, violating the cannabis laws in Canada every single day. And the city says, now we're going to legalize it, and that means we're going to raid you if you don't shut down. And I'm like, how does that make any sense? Legalization should not mean that the cannabis culture is shut down and replaced by some kind of corporate oligarchy that takes over. That is not legalization. Legalization means that everyone growing, buying, selling, and using cannabis now can keep doing that. But it's legal. That means that there's no laws, there's no prohibition anymore. I do not want to see a legalization where we got to go buy Monsanto pot for $20 a gram and the home growers are still getting arrested and shut down. That's prohibition with a different dealer. That is not acceptable, and we're not going to stand for that. So, you know, I urge people to get involved in this movement, to do something to make a difference. You know, if you're here in this room, it's because you love cannabis, because you know these laws have to change. And there's a lot you can do. You know, I tell people to start businesses because a business that can make money doing something that is itself revolutionary, selling bongs, selling cannabis information, selling medical marijuana, that is itself revolutionary in helping people, then you take your profits and you put those profits back into the movement, back into making the change you want. That is a very powerful combination. And what I've seen in Canada is that combination has been very effective for the last 20 years in making huge change. And it's easier for you to resist the police when you've got an income, when you can hire a lawyer, when you can hire staff, when you can reopen and keep things happening, when you can resist in that way. But not everybody can open a business. There's a lot you can do from your own home to change the laws. You know, I got a friend of mine who lives in Ottawa. He's very sick, and his wife is very sick, and without medical marijuana, they would both be dead. And they don't really leave the house very often. They're very frail, very delicate people, but they love marijuana, and he especially hates prohibition. And so when he sees an article online that pisses him off, he doesn't write a comment in the comment section. He writes a letter to the editor. And his letters in Canada have reached millions of people. This guy from his living room has become Canada's most published author of letters to the editor. And he has reached millions of people over the years with his message of marijuana being good and prohibition being wrong. Only takes him an hour or two a week, but his persistence and dedication to writing these letters twice a week has had a huge influence and reached so many people. And you can do that too. There's a lot of ways that individuals can be very effective in changing these laws. Often it's a small number of people that really make these changes happen. The folks that in this room, if all of you decided to spend just 1 or 2 hours a week doing something to change the marijuana laws, that is a very powerful and very effective. You should be talking to your mayors and your councilors. You should be talking to your politicians, even if they don't want to hear your message, even if they tell you that they totally disagree with what you're saying. It doesn't matter. Go in there and talk to those people. Make appointments to speak to your politicians one-on-one. Then get all your friends to do the same thing. That has an influence. You may not feel it at first, but you will feel good when you go in there and tell your local mayor that you want them to tell the police to lay off the cannabis users in your town. You'll feel good when you go talk to your member of parliament, even if they tell you to get lost. You went in there, you talked to them, and you made a difference. And enough voices like that make a difference. Things will change. Do not ever underestimate your own power. It takes time, it takes persistence, but a small number of people working very hard can make a real change in the world very effectively. And it's people all around the world. Like I said, it's not just here in Australia. Everywhere we're inspiring each other. They talked about Portugal decriminalizing many drugs. Uruguay. Who could ever find Uruguay on a map? But you know, Uruguay has said they're going to legalize marijuana, and suddenly Uruguay is a beacon of hope and tolerance for cannabis users all around the world. And we're going to see more and more countries breaking through this. We're going to see more and more countries moving to end these laws. And every country that does, every state, every city that moves towards this gives hope and strength to others around the world, around this planet, that we can make that change happen too. How long have I been talking for? I have no idea, but I probably got some more. You know what I'm going to do for a little bit? I'm going to tell you a couple of fun stories. I wrote a book called The History of Cannabis in Canada. And in this book, I go through the history from the 1606 to modern times, and I talk about the origins of cannabis in Canada. I talk about Australia as well, and how when they were sending criminals to Australia from England, that was so they could work in the hemp fields. You're probably aware of that, the book Marijuana Australiana that's been out for a while, talking about the history of cannabis in Australia. But did you know that in the 1800s, in the mid to late 1800s, cannabis medicines were very prevalent around the world, but they did not know what the active ingredients in cannabis were. THC and CBD were decades away from being isolated. Cannabis medicines were widely used, but they had no way of measuring the potency of these things. So people would buy cannabis medicine. Sometimes you'd get no effect at all. Other times you'd be very, very high, and maybe uncomfortably so. And so in Canadian medical journals and American medical journals, Park Davis, one of the biggest pharmaceutical companies, would advertise that since there was no known chemical test for cannabis, but their products were guaranteed to have the right potency because they used a biological test. And what this means is that from about 1850 till 1930 across North America, hundreds and hundreds of dogs were dosed regularly with cannabis extracts. And that was how they measured the potency. Your job would be to get some extract and give it to 20 dogs and then measure how long it took for those. First, the animals would get excited, then they would calm down, then they would fall asleep, right? We all know that. That's from our own experience, probably, taking big doses of cannabis. What's that? Well, they would record all this kind of information. So they would record how long it took for the dog's tongue to roll out of its mouth, how long till its front legs buckled, how long till it passed out. And they would use this information to titrate the dosages and measure the strength of their cannabis extracts. And it was quite a science behind it because you had to use the same dog over and over again to get a baseline. But if you use the same dog too much, the dog starts developing a tolerance. It starts lying down as soon as the guy comes into the room. And you can actually go online and read these very detailed protocols about how they would work with these dogs and how they would do with it. But I still got to figure that their cannabis extracts probably still had some leeway in their potency. I don't think they were able to get it right down to the fine tuning, but it shows how important this medicine was, what effort they made to make sure that it was the right strength for those who used it. And you know, in Canada and in the States, you could buy pre-rolled joints in Canadian pharmacies from 1850 till Prohibition in the 1930s. They were very, very common across Canada, buying pre-rolled marijuana cigarettes for medicine. I only learned this a few years ago, and I was shocked to discover that these ads for pre-rolled joints, for Grimalt's cannabis cigarettes, were very prevalent, very common in Canadian media, and maybe in Australia. I don't know if they were selling pre-rolled joints down here at that time. But I tell you, that when I did the research, I found the first person in Canada who was convicted for cannabis possession was in the 1930s. It was a guy named Harry Forbes in Vancouver. And he had a few pre-rolled joints on him. He told the judge he'd bought them at a pharmacy to treat his hay fever. And the judge said that's a deadly narcotic and gave him 18 months hard labor in Canada. When they banned cannabis in Canada, they went to the RCMP, burned hemp fields to the ground. And they told farmers, you're growing a deadly narcotic. And farmers said, I had no idea this plant was a deadly narcotic. I didn't know. Oh my goodness, we've been growing it for a long time. Nobody told us how terrible this plant was. The first Canadian convicted for trafficking in marijuana was a pharmacist who was selling these same pre-rolled cannabis cigarettes, and he was also convicted to hard labor. So what a confusing time. You know, in Canada now, you've got dispensaries everywhere. We got hemp farmers growing cannabis, but there's still a lot of confusion in the law and where things are, and I realize this has been going on a long time, this confusion as to what the laws actually are around cannabis and what is happening with that. But you know, in Canada, we do have hemp farmers growing a lot of hemp. And when those hemp farmers grow hemp, they make a lot of resin. Those hemp plants they grow make a lot of resin. They grow plants mostly for seed. We don't really grow a lot of fiber in Canada. They're growing for seed production. Well, when you grow for seed, you want female plants with big fat buds that get fertilized by the male plants. And just like marijuana plants, those hemp plants produce a lot of resin. Now, they're limited in Canada to the THC level, so they breed these plants to be high in CBD and low in THC. I'm assuming you folks know what CBD is and that we're aware of that, or should I explain that? Anybody not know what CBD is? So there's two main chemicals in the cannabis plant that are medicinal. There's many more, but the two main ones are THC and CBD. THC is the most well-known and pretty much the most psychoactive one. It's got a lot of medical benefits, but it also gets you high, which I think is a bonus, but some might disagree. CBD is also very medicinal, but doesn't really have any psychoactive effect. So that's why our farmers are allowed to produce high CBD plants, but they can't grow any THC. Canada's hemp farmers produce far more resin than all of our marijuana farmers put together. No matter how big your greenhouse is or your basement grow is, you can't compare with somebody who's harvesting their plants with a tractor and growing hundreds of hectares at a time. Well, those farmers have to throw away all that resin. They can't keep it. They have to mulch it back into the ground. They can only keep the seeds, which they sell and make a profit. If they could keep that CBD resin, which they finally asked to do for the first time in Canada last year, can we please keep the CBD resin? It's a waste product. They could capture that and they could sell it, let's say, for 2 or 3 times what they sell their hemp seeds for. That means that pure CBD could be produced by Canadian farmers for literally a few dollars a gram. For pure CBD, a product now that costs many $100s per gram to access. I believe that real legalization doesn't just mean farmers growing hemp that they extract the CBD from. To me, real legalization means that farmers in Canada and all around the world can grow high-potency THC plants by the thousands and thousands of hectares and extract those resins and make pure and potent medicines for dollars a gram. And you know, if they want to shut down the underground industry, the way to do that is not with cops and with dogs and with harassment and with jails and prisons. It's to make legal cannabis so cheap, so affordable, and such high quality that growing your own is fun for a hobby, but economically it's just not worth the effort. You know, I believe everybody should be able to grow as much marijuana as they want at home, right? I believe just like tomatoes and lettuce, you should be able to grow as many plants as you want. But I also believe that legal marijuana should be so cheap and plentiful that most people won't bother. Why would you bother growing your own if you can buy it for $2 a gram for world-class cannabis, or buy pure extracts for dollars on the pound? Those kind of prices are what we need. And that's the future that I want to see for cannabis. I want to see everybody on earth able to grow cannabis like any other plant. But I also want to see farmers growing it in such a way that these products are so cheap. People tell me, well, I make a living growing marijuana. If I can't sell it for $2,000 a pound or whatever it is here, I'm not going to be able to make a living. And I have sympathy for that. And I tell those growers, you got a long time before it's going to be legal, so make your money while you can. But your children should not be growing marijuana at that price and selling it, because for every dollar you make, that means someone else there who needs marijuana medicine is having to pay an expensive price for that plant as well. And prohibition has to mean that these prices drop so drastically. And I want to see everybody who needs medical cannabis to be able to get it and to be able to afford it. I want to see pure cannabis extracts to be so readily available that nobody on earth has to go without their medicine, that nobody on earth has to suffer for lack of access to cannabis because this plant grows freely like any other plant. And one campaign I've just started in Vancouver or in Canada or recently is I've got my hands on several million cannabis seeds. And I've been giving them away across Canada. I've given away over 1 million seeds so far from coast to coast by mail order and in person. I traveled to 16 cities across Canada right before I came here. 3 days before I flew here, I got back from Halifax. And in each city, I give a long talk about the history of cannabis in Canada. I talk about how people can become activists and get involved in their community. And then I give away seeds and encourage them to grow them openly on their own property. I encourage them to plant them in parks and on trails and in traffic circles and in downtown planters and anywhere else they can find a patch of soil where this seed will take root. Because what I've seen over the years in Canada and around the world is that if we are so prevalent, if we can overgrow the government, I believe there's an Overgrow Australia campaign going on. This is not an idea that I came up with myself. People around the world are doing this, giving away these seeds. Because if everybody can grow cannabis, if cannabis grows everywhere openly and freely, then it becomes pointless for the police to try to stop it. I want you to walk down the street and see a cannabis plant growing in there and go, that looks lovely. That's the 10th one I've seen today walking down the street. Isn't it a wonderful world we live in? I don't want you to see a cannabis plant and go, oh my God, that's a cannabis plant. What's it doing there? Has anybody seen this yet? Are the cops going to get it? Am I too close? Is something going to happen? Cannabis is a plant like any other plant, and there's plenty of plants in your garden that can get you really high, that can kill you, that can cause you all kinds of problems if you eat them or smoke them or do anything with them. In fact, compared to many plants, cannabis is one of the safest ones out there. So why can't it grow openly and freely anywhere? I actually spent the night in jail for doing this giveaway in the city of Calgary, which is the heart of Canada's oil industry and where our last Prime Minister, Stephen Harper, came from, a guy who passed some of the world's harshest mandatory minimum sentences. In Canada right now, if you get caught growing 6 plants to share with a friend, you get 6 months behind bars, minimum sentence in Canada. We got a prime minister now who used to smoke pot fairly recently. He hasn't changed those laws yet, so we still have these harsh laws in Canada. But so I gave away seeds, and in Calgary, the police came and they arrested one of my volunteers. And I said, you can't arrest someone at my event if you're not going to arrest me. I'm the guy giving away seeds. And I basically made them arrest me. They'd grabbed one of my volunteers getting some more seeds from the van, and they grabbed our van, and I went out there and I said, look, you can't arrest this guy. Arrest me. They said, no, we don't want to. I said, okay, get me some marijuana seeds. And I grabbed some seeds. I put them in a few of my friends' hands. I put a few in my hand and held it. The police officer said, look, I've got seeds in my hand. You have to arrest me. He said, okay, I'll arrest you. I don't normally seek out being arrested, right? In fact, after 20 years of activism and seeing many of my friends get arrested over and over again, somehow I've avoided it. But I thought it's going to be legal soon. I better, get some street cred and spend a night behind bars, right? It was actually because this other guy had been arrested, and I didn't want to volunteer being charged at my event. And sure enough, they released him without charges, but they've charged me with trafficking in cannabis seeds. They told me that they're going to try to seek a 6-month mandatory sentence on me. People are like, aren't you afraid? I'm like, no. They're not going to give me 6 months in jail in Canada for giving away low THC, high CBD cannabis seeds. That's bizarre and ridiculous. And if they do, it will just create such a stir to put someone away like that. But it's not going to happen. In fact, that was the second stop on my tour. I did 14 more cities across Canada. Not a single police officer showed up ever again. What was actually kind of funny about this is that is that all the seeds that they got at my event, none of them were actually on my person. They were people giving them out for me or in the hallway or ones in the van, which was actually in my friend's name. So all they had was those 6 seeds that I had in my hand. And I gave them to the officer. I said, arrest me. And sure enough, he took those seeds, put them in an evidence bag, put me in the police car, drove me off to the jail. As we pulled in, he was like, wait a minute, we're going to go somewhere else. He pulled out and he drove off to another jail an hour and a half away. And I said, why are you moving me? He said, I don't know. What had happened was my friend back at the event had said, we're going to go down to that jail. We're going to get Dana out of there. We're not going to let this stand. And the police were like, oh my God, there's going to be a riot of cannabis users at the jail. So they took me to the far away jail so they couldn't, as if they're going to do anything, right? But anyway, so I spend the night in jail. I go through all this rigmarole. I get out on bail the next day. My bail conditions are that I cannot possess any drug, including cannabis seeds, unless prescribed by a doctor or dentist, unless I'm at work. Because I run a medical marijuana dispensary, which, as I've said, is also in the gray area of the law. In fact, probably selling medical marijuana to thousands of patients every day is more illegal than giving away cannabis seeds in Canada. But I'm allowed to possess seeds and pod and do things at my dispensary in Vancouver. They just said, while you're at work. Well, to me, I'm at work right now. This is my life's work. He didn't say at work at my dispensary. So I'm hoping this works for me because I have certainly been possessing and using a lot of cannabis and cannabis seeds since that happened. Is this going to go on the news in Canada? I hope not. But you know, it shows the ridiculousness of this situation. And what the actual absurdity was that morning, after spending the night in jail with a bunch of folks who were way worse off than I was, and I get out, they give me my tie back, they give you your belt back so you don't hang yourself in jail, right? They take your tie and your belt. And the duty officer who's got all my stuff there, he gives me my wallet, and he gives me back the bag, the evidence bag with the cannabis seeds in it. They'd given it to him, and I was there when he gave it to him, and they were like, I don't know, put him in his stuff. And then they said, oh, we'll get back to him. And I just promised not to possess cannabis seeds, so I'm like, if I take these, are they going to grab me? This is a trap. Are they going to grab me? So I take the seeds, and I'm okay, and I put them in my pocket. I've still got these seeds. And my lawyer says when we go to trial, I've got a hearing in May 18th. I should be like, hey, you guys forgot something. Do you want them back? Because that's the only evidence they had of me personally having seeds in my possession, and they gave them back to me. So it just shows that they're not taking it seriously. It's really ridiculous. Why should we take it seriously? But I guess, you know, my takeaway from all of this is that this is an historic time in around the world. And we are so close to cannabis legalization in every country on earth. We are so close to ending this. But, you know, when you study the history of cannabis around the world, so I don't know what it was like in Australia in the 70s, but in Canada and the US, we thought it was going to be legal. In Canada, we had this Ledane Commission in 1971, and it told the government, you should legalize marijuana. We had Pierre Trudeau as Prime Minister who said it's time to decriminalize. And our conservative leader, Joe Clark, said it's time to decriminalize. And the American President, Jimmy Carter, said it's time to decriminalize. And many American states are passing laws by referendums to decriminalize marijuana. And everybody thought, oh, it's going to be legal any day now. It's going to happen any day now. They even had a victory party. Normal Canada had a legalization victory party a little bit early, because it hasn't happened yet. That was like, you know, I was a little boy back then, right? And so, you know, we're so close now, but we can't let this slip through our grasp. We can't have our kids. I don't want my daughter being here 30 years from now going, we thought it was so close in the late 2010s. You know, we were so close in 2017. We thought it was going to happen. And then Trump became president, and all the marijuana thing crashed, and they pushed it. We can't let that happen, right? We've got to push through now. We have a chance all around the world. We are so close, and I don't want to pass this off to another generation. In fact, I want you to do a little exercise with me. I want you to imagine yourself in the future. I want you to imagine yourself as a grandparent, a grandmother, a grandfather. If you're already a grandfather or grandmother, then as a great-grandfather or grandmother. But I want you to imagine yourself in the future where you're with your grandchild there, and they're getting ready for school in the morning. They're flipping through their history book, cramming for an exam that day. Then they turn to you and they say, Grandma, Granddad, I'm reading in my history book here that cannabis used to be illegal all around the world, in Australia and every other country, and that it was like 100 years that this plant was illegal, and people would go to jail, and there was millions of arrests and billions of dollars spent all around the planet, and it was this massive pogrom. People were executed. I'm reading how people would go to jail for their whole lives, and families were destroyed, and yet how can that be? I want them to ask you, how can that be? When I'm having hemp seed porridge for breakfast like I do every day, when I know that you use cannabis medicines to treat the aches and pains of being a senior, I know that we have a patch of cannabis in the backyard that I love helping you tend and take care of. I know that our house is built out of hemp fiber board, that's like that. I know my clothes are made out of hemp. I know the bus that takes me to school is built out of hemp composite fiber and runs on hemp seed fuel. I know the history book I'm reading is printed on hemp paper. So how can it be that this plant that was so intertwined in my life, that is such a part of everything we do, how could this have been illegal for so long? How did that happen, and how can that be? And I want you to be able to say, yeah, it's true. It was a dark time. And when I grew up through Prohibition. And I saw maybe myself or my friends were arrested and charged, and we had to hide. The police would search us on the way to our cannabis events. They would harass us and mock us. And the media and the news made fun of us and said we were bad people. And we had to fight against shame and discrimination every single day. But you know what? I did something. I hope every one of you in this room can say, I did something to end those laws. I got involved. Whether it's writing letters to the paper, whether it's marching in rallies, whether it's making Nimbin the most wonderful place in the world, I did something to change those laws. I sacrificed, I worked, and I made a difference. And I did that so that you, the next generation, that you would never have to know what it is to be ashamed or have to hide for what herbal medicine you use, or to fear arrest or persecution for what plants you choose to grow in your garden. I want that to be the legacy that I leave and that we all leave to our next generation, to end this war in our lifetimes when we have this chance, so that future generations look back upon it as a mistake, as an error, and a time that they've grown past, and that is something that we look back upon as a terrible mistake. That's the future legacy I want to leave, and I hope we can all leave together for the next generation. So I hope that you will do something, anything, every single day, until these laws are ended, not only here in Nimbin, not only in Australia, but in every country on earth. I will not rest until cannabis can be grown freely and openly in every single country on earth. And when that day has come, then my work is done, and I hope yours will be also. So thank you very much for listening to my talk, and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have. And I'm happy to answer anything you might ask me about cannabis or anything in the world. Anybody?
Hi, Dana. My name's Fiona. I'm going to speak up here afterward you. But, I was just in Canada the other week and was actually really excited that President Trudeau has announced the legalisation of cannabis in Canada. And I wondered if you have any ideas of what that legislation is going to look like.
It's going to suck. Like, it'll be better than Prohibition, but it's still going to suck, right? The first iteration of legalization is going to be the most restrictive, tightly controlled thing they can possibly do. And you can hear it in their rhetoric, right? They should be saying, we're going to legalize marijuana because Prohibition was a 100-year mistake that did nothing good for anybody. It was based on racism and ignorance. All we've done is ruin lives and hurt people. And in fact, cannabis is a wonderful plant, and we're sorry we ever made it illegal. That's what legalization should be based on, right? But that's not what they're saying. They're saying, you're right, marijuana is dangerous and harmful, it's bad, but Prohibition isn't working. And the best way to keep this harmful, bad substance out of the hands of kids is with a tightly controlled legalization regime that restricts access and all this kind of stuff, right? Now, I understand politically why they're doing that. I understand why they put a cop in charge of legalization. I don't happen to like it, but it's to nullify the attacks on their opponents, right? So they say things like, we're going to pass harsh new laws to keep it out of the hands of minors. Well, Canada already has mandatory minimum sentences, which our courts are ruling unconstitutional pretty much every day. These laws are not even valid under our system, right? So they're saying, but they can't say, we're going to loosen the penalties of people selling marijuana to minors. In practical terms, that's what legalization has to mean. It's got to be like alcohol, where it's still against the law to sell to minors, but nobody's selling alcohol to a minor is going to jail for a long time. You might lose your liquor license, you might get fined. If you do it a lot, you might get in trouble, but it's not the same thing, right? You sell marijuana to minors, so that's got to change. But what I'm most upset about is that they've done nothing yet. We still have Stephen Harper's mandatory minimums. A guy in Ottawa got busted recently, or Ontario, got busted recently and charged for growing one cannabis plant in his own home. He called the police about something else. They said, we see a plant here. And they charged him. He's going to court for that in Trudeau's Canada. I've been charged with trafficking in cannabis seeds, right? Bong shops are still being raided in some parts of the country. So what we hoped would happen is that he would immediately stop arrest for possession of under 30 grams or whatever, under 40, I don't even care, just 1 gram. Just stop arresting some people people, please. But I would like to see an immediate stop for personal possession and personal cultivation. Everybody should be able to grow. Just give us 3 plants to start with while you're waiting to get it all worked out. Even just 1 plant is better than 0. Going from 0 plants to 1 plant is really hard. Going from 1 plant to 1,000 plants, that's way easier, right? Just that first plant. But they've done nothing, and he's made it clear they're not going to do anything at all, and until the law changes. They've announced that in 2017, the spring of 2017, they're going to introduce legislation to begin the legalization process. I mean, that's great. That's going to be several years down the line. I don't think we're going to see legal government-approved marijuana for sale in Canada until after our next election. I don't think they can grow enough cannabis to meet the Canadian market. They're struggling in Washington and Colorado to meet their domestic markets. And Canada's a much bigger place. It's geographically huge. It's got more population than many of those states do. We're like California in terms of population equivalency, right? And so the idea, we've got 24 companies in Canada now that are licensed to produce legal medical marijuana, and they can sell it to patients by mail order. You've got to register with your doctor. You've got to pick one company in advance. You can only buy from that company. They send it to you by mail order. You're limited in how much you can get. And so that's a bad system, right? But those companies are all chomping at the bit because they want to be the ones. They're like, yeah, we should keep home growing illegal. We should shut down all the dispensaries. We'll supply everybody marijuana. We got the good stuff. But even if that happened, they could supply less than 0.1% of the Canadian market right now. They don't have enough cannabis. They've got some pretty big warehouses, but you can't supply 30 million people with marijuana with a big warehouse, right? You need a lot of cannabis, and it's just not there. And so it's a weird situation in Canada with these dispensaries proliferating, with people openly violating the law. Right now in Canada, it's up to a city to decide if they want it legalized or not. Every mayor is making that decision. If the mayor says, I support my local medical marijuana dispensary, the police don't raid it. The police don't have to listen to the mayor, but every time the mayor says that, the police don't bust it. Every time the mayor says, I don't like that dispensary, or if the mayor just says, it's a federal issue, I have no control, I can't do anything, the cops go, okay, and they go in and raid it. But we're seeing more and more cities across Canada, because no one wants to be the first, right? But when you see 8 other cities have licensed dispensaries, well, we can do it too, maybe. And now we've got Vancouver, Victoria, Nanaimo, Toronto, Ottawa, Montreal, many small towns around British Columbia have got dispensaries that are licensed. And so in a way, I think if Trudeau takes like 3 or 4 years, it's not going to matter because we're going to have 1,000 medical marijuana shops operating across Canada, most of which will have a pretty broad definition of medical marijuana. It doesn't really matter what they do at that point. What we are seeing, which I think is interesting, is that people are jockeying as to who's going to make the money off marijuana. So in Ontario and British Columbia, our liquor laws are done province by province in Canada, right? So each province has a different age limit. They're all pretty much the same, but each province has their own rules, their own access. Some of them sell it under strict government control. Some of them are very open. But in 2 provinces now, BC and Ontario, the liquor unions have said, we want to sell marijuana. We're good at keeping kids out. We've got a whole system set up. We're great at selling marijuana. We want to cash in on that. And the pot people are like, we don't think you should sell that next to alcohol. Like, I'm not necessarily against cannabis being sold with alcohol, but not if that's the only place you can get. That should be the last place they put it, right? It should be available everywhere else first. You know, like I said, I'm not against people drinking if they want it, but you should at least have to walk down the street. You shouldn't be encouraging people to use the two together because alcohol makes marijuana a lot more dangerous. And so, and also we're seeing now the pharmacists, London Drugs, one of our big pharmaceutical chains, and Shoppers Drug Mart, they're saying, well, we'll sell prescription marijuana because we know how to sell prescriptions, we know about drugs, and of course they know jack shit all about cannabis, right? They're not herbalists. They're not going to sell herbal extracts. I wouldn't mind seeing cannabis products in a drugstore as a non-prescription drug. Cannabis creams and tinctures, they should be available everywhere. But yeah, they should be available in a London Drugs or a Shoppers Drug Mart or whatever the equivalent is. But this should not be the only option, right? When we talk about legalization that we want it to be in a way like beer. It should be more open than beer. But beer, you can brew your own in your own home. You should be able to grow your own cannabis for yourself and your friends in your own home. You can go to a U-brew place, I assume, here. You can do that in Canada. They'll brew it for you. You can go to a pub and you can buy beer. You can go to a liquor store and buy beer. You can go to a festival and buy beer. You can go all different kinds of places and have access to alcohol products. That's what it needs to be like for marijuana as well. I know I'm diverging from your question, but I have one last point about Trudeau. He's assigned a police officer to be head of this commission, and they're putting together a commission of provincial leaders and healthcare officials and, of course, a whole lot of cops and enforcement people. But there's no marijuana people on this commission. Not a single cannabis user is going to be on it. And a good friend of mine, Jody Emery, who's a prominent cannabis activist in Canada and the wife of Marc Emery, she's put in a formal request to be on that commission and to be able to participate. And at first they were like, well, maybe, but Bill Blair, the cop, just said, no, we're not going to have any marijuana activists on there. Can you imagine like a commission on women's rights that was all men, or a commission on racial equality that was a bunch of white people, or a commission on LGBT rights that was all straight people, or whatever it is, right? The idea that they're going to have a commission to figure out how to legalize cannabis and not a single person on there is going to probably have ever used marijuana. Certainly none of them will admit to using it now. That's an absolute disgrace. And to me, it shows that the results that they come out with are probably not going to be that good. That being said, one thing that they have said to me, I think is a good sign. Both Trudeau and Bill Blair, the cop, have said that legal marijuana needs to be cheaper than the current black market or no one's going to buy it. And that is absolutely true. If they try to sell us in Canada, pots between $5 and $10 a gram, depending where you go, less if you buy a larger quantity. If they're going to try to sell us $12 legal grams, no one's going to buy it. The odd person will buy some, but most people aren't. Certainly I'm not. And I'm their target market. The guy who smokes 1 gram a week, he'll go buy a $12 gram because he doesn't care, $2 extra, whatever, right? It's nothing if you're a minor user. When they ask me how much cannabis I smoke, I say all of it. And so I'm not going to buy 12. I can't afford $12 a gram. Me and my friends aren't going to buy it. And we're the target market because we're going to be using most of it, right? So legal marijuana's got to be cheaper. It needs to be better, and it can be those things. And although, that could mean my dispensary could go out of business. I say, they want to shut down all the dispensaries in Canada? Just make legal pot $2 a gram. I can't compete with that, and I'd be happy. I consider that a victory if I had to shut down my dispensary because there was other legal marijuana out there that was better than what I had and cheaper than what I had. My staff might not be so happy because they might lose their jobs, but that's what I'm fighting for. I'm not fighting so I can stay in business selling $5 grams to sick people. I do that because it needs to be done, and that's the lowest price I can do it at and still stay in business. But I would love it if I went bankrupt because legal pot's $1 a gram and marijuana is being grown by the thousands of hectares and it's so cheap and affordable that people don't need specialized cannabis dispensaries. Or if we did, our business model would be a lot different than some guy growing a small amount at his home. Sure, yeah, I'm taking two. Okay, go ahead. Give me another one.
Yeah, hi. I was in Vancouver last week and went to one of the dispensaries and was really quite blown away by the range of products that were available. So in particular, the emergence of things like the oils, vaporized oils, shatter, butter. These are things which largely in Australia are very, very boutique and still in an emerging market. Can you describe where you see those products going compared to the traditional plant bud materials?
I think those are the future. I think that extracts are largely the future because you can take a mid-grade product and turn it into a very potent product. And I think under full legalization, people will smoke a lot less joints. I mean, I love joints and I'm going to smoke joints forever. But for a lot of folks, if they have access to, you'll see these vapor pens, right? And you can put a little bit of extract in there. It's still an underground thing. A lot of these products are not always being made safely, making shatter and extracts using solvents that are flammable and explosive. I know people that have been very irresponsible, blown up places, injured themselves permanently making this stuff. Most don't, but some do. But that being said, those products are the future. And under legalization, they can be made in vast quantities, very cheaply, very affordable. Like I said, from farmers growing large quantities. A farmer is not going to produce a perfectly manicured bud, but who cares? They're going to produce so much extracts and resins. This is such a low price. And I feel that in a legalization world, people still don't want to smell like pot. They're still going to get harassed if they're driving their car and they smell like pot. They're still going to get harassed if they've got kids and they smoke pot around their kids or at their workplace. But a few drops in your tea, a little pen you can inhale, those kind of things are very discreet, very possible. But I don't want to be a pot snob. But at my dispensary, we have 30 strains of cannabis and all these kind of things. I haven't seen any cannabis in Australia yet that compares with what's available in Vancouver. It might be out there, and I've been enjoying the bushweed and the hydro and that I've been smoking here. But definitely, there's room for improvement. And the benefit of extracts is you can take a B-grade bud and turn it into an A-grade extract. And you can, if the plant's moldy or contaminated in some way, you can clean that out through the extraction process. There's a guy who's got bubble bags, and I don't know if bubble bags are common here or not, but ice water extraction, you can make a highly pure product. You can do it in the bush, you can do it with your outdoor, and you can make an incredibly potent product with no danger. The worst you're gonna do is make a puddle. And I encourage you to look at the bubble bags. I prefer bubble bag hash to the shatter and the dabs, personally. The shatter is a little easier to make, but I think that the water extraction is more pure. I know here people don't like the hydro because it's chemi or whatever, right? Well, when you make water extraction, you're making a very pure product. You're not adding any other weird chemicals. Your butane won't put any residues in it. But I do think in the long run, that legalization will mean buds become less prevalent, and extracts and capsules and drops and tinctures and all those kind of things. Suppositories are becoming very popular in Canada and getting a lot of news and a few chuckles here and there. But certainly, you know, that's an excellent way to get medicine in your system as well. Anyways, there you go.
Yeah, thanks so much. Look, we're in Australia's centre of growing high-quality organic marijuana. It has been for 40 years. The people who grow it are experts, they grow great stuff, and many of them have invested many years in producing a fine organic medicinal compound.
Excellent.
That has a lot of very loyal customers. You said the laws always suck when they come in, but if these guys are still criminals and what you call the Monsanto solution, a chemical company coming in with either genetically modified cannabis or deliberately down-grown cannabis, and we're told to give that to our kids who need it, we're going to have a revolution here. I reckon that's the most important single point we need to try and change in the trials, in the legislation that's coming in.
You know, I worry about the GMO cannabis and the Monsanto DuPont cannabis, though I will say that I've never actually seen that happening, you know? Like in Canada, we've got big money in there, certainly. There's some of these new companies are worth $500 million. There's some serious capital, and they are lobbying to continue prohibition, but for them to be the dealers, right? And that's not what we want. And their pot's not that great. But I have yet to actually see a confirmed, anybody actually growing GMO cannabis or Monsanto actually growing cannabis yet. But I mean, absolutely. But the thing is, they're going to try to control it and cash in on it, but it's very hard to do. You know, once you start to open it up more, it becomes very difficult to control what happens. They can't control cannabis under strict prohibition right now. They can't stop us from growing and using our own marijuana now. It's going to be harder when they legalize it, but then try to put more controls over it. I feel that legalization in Canada and other places are going to try to put strict controls, but it's going to slip through their fingers like water, like sand. They're not going to be able to hold on to it. And I think that's why they don't want to legalize it, because you can't control it. It's a plant, and it's impossible to really control. You know, they've spent 100 years trying to eradicate this plant from the face of the earth. Yet it grows in every city and town and hamlet on the planet. And so I think when they start to legalize it, it's going to be even harder for them to control and restrict it. I'm not going to buy Monsanto weed. I know you aren't either. And I think that most people are going to resist that as much as possible. I sure hope so.
Yeah, wow. Thank you very much, Dana Larsen. That is awesome.
I will just add that I'm going to be over at the Hemp Embassy in the front. I've got 3 books, Harry Pothead and the Marijuana Stone, Green Buds and Hash, which is a parody of Green Eggs and Ham, and my Illustrated History of Cannabis in Canada. If you want to chat with me or find out more or buy one of my books, I'm happy to sign it for you. And I'll be sitting over at the Hemp Embassy somewhere for the next hour or so to do that if you want to join me.
Cool,
Thank you very
much. Cool. And yeah, if you have any more questions, you can talk to Dana personally.